Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Yu, and our Seed Oil Survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today we have another program in store for you on A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gornoski, and I'm joined by my friend Tho Bishop of the Mises Institute. He's an editor there, highly involved with the development of economic education and information educational assets and videos. A lot of great creative work Tho's involved with. So thanks for joining me, Tho.
Thank you for having me, David. I was glad to join.
I did a show yesterday about the indictments of Trump and also the attacks against things like Project Veritas and stuff. And I think one thing that we have to be, I think, in my opinion, from the anthropological framework I take to this issue, I don't think it's going to ever be able to the United States government. People say this is the end of the republic, the Constitution, or whatever, but I think at a very practical level in terms of the maintenance of the empire, if they get Trump behind bars, that's going to destroy the aura of the justice system in the United States at a level we've never seen before. It's gonna rip apart the prison industrial complex at a deep, visceral level culturally, because Democrats have always had, and their whole brand with Antifa has always been kind of oriented towards a kind of resistance towards heavy-handed measures for incarceration and drug war. They're pretty viscerally primed against that. And then you've got libertarians and some criminal justice reform Republicans who have been increasingly skeptical of the incarceration state of America. And now the populists, which were the ones who would be most primed for kind of a tough on crime, throw the book at people system, are now getting a crash course, whether it's January 6th and the treatment of those folks, or Project Veritas getting raided for having Ashley Biden's diary, or Trump and all the folks that are getting attacked and 564 years that he's facing. I think they're getting a crash course into the absolute corruption of the justice system. And without a justice system that everybody believes in as an above the fray punitive measure to keep everything in peace, you don't have the ability to create a structure of society anymore, because that's kind of that's the state's trump card is, you listen to us or else we have the aura of legitimacy to put you in a cage for as long as we deem fit. And people have largely gone along with that belief, but it's cracking at different levels. And to put the president, the symbolic high priest of the state, into the belly of the prison system under what everybody knows viscerally is the politically charged situation, really just it's jumping the shark, and so to speak,
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, we had Mises University last week, and at the end of the program on Saturday, my Radio Rothbard, our Mises Institute podcast co-host, Ryan McMakin, and I, we went through Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State, and it was remarkable just how much the message, the material within that short book, kind of a mini book, little pamphlet thing, really resonates with the modern political environment, because that's one of the things that Rothbard talks about, is that ultimately what the state really is it's an entity that requires that perception of legitimacy in order to strengthen itself, in order to have the true power to undergo and to wield the might and brutality of the state over the citizenry. And this is why what the state fears most are questions to its legitimacy. What they fear most are crimes against its own privilege. What they fears most is the dissemination of conspiracy theories that undermine its narratives. And Trump, in spite of his own inefficiencies and effectiveness when he was actually president, has terrified a lot of these forces of power. And I do think it is important, like from my perspective, the pushback to Trump is not a sort of 4D chess move of wanting to elevate Trump, right? Each indictment serving as an in-kind donation to his campaign to ensure that he is the candidate in order to, help the Democrats' chance nationally. I don't know if that calculation might be correct, in the long run in terms of blowback, and we've seen how this thing plays off. But I don't think that is ultimately what is pushing these continual indictments against Trump. I think it really is that derangement that Trump was able to spark in the souls, or lack thereof, of his most powerful opponents. And I do think it's interesting within the right, you have this interesting conflict, because on one side, when we talk about policing and the police as an entity and things like that, on the one side, you have a lot of concerns about real crime, about the rise of violent crime, the rise of property crime, the sort of anarcho-tyrannical state that we have in prominently blue cities, where people are very concerned about the lack of policing, a justice system that goes after those who take justice in their own hands and defend their shops when they're being looted by thugs. On the other side, though, is that you also have the recognition of kind of, Kingsley Cortez, who's one of my favorite Twitter accounts in the new right. She, every time there's a video of a police officer kind of doing the bidding of the regime, silencing protests and the like, she always just quips back, don't back the blue if they don't back you. And I think that is a recognition that conservatives have right now, is that there are definitely aspects of this police state. I don't mean that kind of with the negative connotation that usually comes with it, but just policing entities in general, that many of them have been co-opted against, actively against what we might call the American nation, the American people, in favor of the regime's actions. And I think that is a little bit different. I would separate that from other critiques about, say whether victimless crime should be, result in jail time, things like that. So I think those are two conversations there. But the explicitly ideological aim of, again, in particular, the FBI, the weaponization of the government, is something that has become a mainstream and one of the top priorities, I think, of your average Republican voter. And I think that is one of the positive reflections of all of this, because ultimately I think that the state doing what it is doing right now is a demonstration of its weakness, not of its power. And ultimately, though, that there is a secondary dynamic where, even with the facade of legitimacy falling, the powers of the FBI to infiltrate, to arrest, to survey, to control, the powers of the regime continue to expand. So I'm not so I think it would be a mistake to assume that the weakness of the regime's legitimate authority in the eyes of people is going to equate to a breakdown of these very tyrannical powers that is currently executing. But I think at the very least, it is putting it on full display. And I think it is requiring anyone who has eyes and a functioning brain to reevaluate their relationship with the state and the way that it should be seen. I think that has the possibility for perhaps creating the sort of intellectual awakening that is always necessary to have any style of revolution, whether it's within the form or bigger than that. But I think that is a very interesting, dynamic political change that continues to escalate ever since 2016.
I mean, you look at in 1998 and 1997, you had the rise of one of the most popular story lines in the 1990s and TV history, which was the Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon feud on WWF at the time. And this is a guy who was screwed over. The character was screwed over by his boss every way, but he kept coming back and he kept finding a way to break the rules. And that is Trump's story arc, whether you like it or not. And it could only inevitably, I mean, in a nation of pioneers, misfits, outlaws, Bonnie and Clyde, all these legends and mythic characters that we have in the Wild West, you can't really get, and also even in urban culture, I mean, hip hop culture still venerates the outlaw who is wrongfully imprisoned, right? And wrongfully persecuted by the cops. Trump is uniting that urban myth and that Western myth, that American, I'm not going to let the man put me down vibe. He's going to fully go into that mode. And the best thing that I think could happen to his legendary story arc here is for him to go to prison, like to fight that. If he gets off, it won't have quite as much effect, because they'll always be able to say, well, he got away with it. But if he actually goes to prison, that visceral reality of a president of the United States who's in his elderly years going into prison, and you really look at the charges, and it's just not quite a slam dunk on any level. Any of the things they're proposing, it's just not clear. They just don't have that strong of a case. It's all, you kind of have to squint or be delusional or stupid to kind of, get to really buy into it, to really get into the storyline. And the storyline is just not as believable anymore. We see what's happening to the country. We see the corruption. And even the most hardcore Trump fanatic, Trump hater knows that there's just something weird a little bit. Subconsciously, they know there's something off with the fact that's like, out of all the Republicans, this is the one that is singularly criminally culpable. And of all the politicians, Democrat and Republican alike, not a single one ever gets anything but this guy, the one who was a little bit disruptive. At some point, even in that Kool-Aid drinking mind, not all of them, but I think even some of them will start to say, they won't like him, but there'll be a visceral kind of distrust with the system after this if he goes to prison. Do you see that happening, or do you think they're just all going to stay delusional to death? I don't think so.
I think that there's definitely a independent-minded voter, sort of person who has never considered themselves particularly partisan, who perhaps actively mocks partisan politics. Again, this is, perhaps easiestly identified as sort of, the Joe Rogan voter, where, I have no idea how Joe Rogan voted the past, but if it came down to a indicted Trump versus, a Biden, I think that you're going to see Joe Rogan for the first time, publicly talk about voting for Trump because of that very dynamic. Now, the question is going to be, how large of a population does that exist? The other valid question is, where were those voters during the midterms? And I get that there's you can break down to perhaps the sort of voter that listens to Joe Rogan is a lot less tuned into midterms generally. They're less likely to vote in off-year elections. They're a lot less interested in state politics and Senate races and all of that. That's probably all true. I think it is interesting. I'm very interested in the history of populist politics in the U.S. and the Jacksonian era and some of these populist moments. What you see is a massive increase in voter participation. And you even saw this in 2020, where while Trump lost by obviously the official totals, and that's a whole other topic with its own right, you saw an incredible surge in turnout, some of which assisted with the great new ease by which it was able to cast a vote in the COVID era. An interesting thing in its own right. But even in this era of extraordinarily high voter turnout, Republicans did very well as the opposition party outside of the presidential race. And so I think that backlash dynamic perhaps is still out there. But I think that they've done a great job of, again, really radicalizing. There is no middle ground between the person that would vote for Trump and the person that would put on a Joe Biden bumper sticker on their car or to put in a Joe Biden yard sign in their yard. You cannot have, there's no element, there's no area of compromise. There's no persuasion that you can have between those two types of political behaviors, I think, at this point. And I think that goes to, an element of Trump that has worked both ways. That double-edged sword is the sort of superficial vulgarity of Trump, where it helped him sort of communicate with a type of voter that usually did not vote Republican in 2016. It turns off a sort of voter that might have historically voted Republican. Prior to that, we can think of like the suburban, affluent couple that both of them are have college degrees and the like, right? That really, I think, has hurt Trump within, say, like the Georgia suburbs and the like. Why you see politicians like Brian Kemp out before Trump with those same sort of voters, that level of vulgarity, I think, does hit some people at that superficial level. But again, you look at the extent to which they're doing. I mean, the indictment yesterday, was reliant upon anti-Ku Klux Klan laws from the 1880s to make their case. I think that, while
made for a Netflix
I think
documentary or something.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I think that, there is perhaps, there are within the litany of Trump prosecutions, I think some have some stronger facts to the case than others, right? I think that a case narrowly focused, for example, on the handling of confidential documents narrowly, I tend to think that there's a stronger legal argument there. Now we can go to the hypocrisy angle, but hypocrisy is what it is. I think that argument perhaps has a lot more to really legalize, to adjudicate than the insurrection narrative there. But the fact they just keep dogpiling on this within the scope of an election, with an active candidate, with the front runner of a major political party, given everything that we've seen, given the growing specter of the Biden family's own corruption and all of this, I think that this can only fuel that sort of FU rage that I think Trump was clearly able to capitalize on in 2016. It's a lot harder to capitalize on that when you are the president. Again, and Trump did not help himself with some of the policy decisions, with some of the people he surrounded himself with. So I think a lot of that FU energy went away in 2020, particularly when you add in the consequences of federal policies on COVID. But whether he can fully get that flame lit in this cycle, I think that's also going to kind of, it's going to be interesting to see, what do you pair? What is the strategy for pairing a candidate Trump in the face of all these indictments, in the face of all this baggage? How do you structure that campaign for the general election if the response is to, we're going to connect this with sort of a focus group tested, we're going to check a demographic box and hope that, people's superficial attraction to a Tim Scott or a Nikki Haley is going to bring over
it's not going to do anything,
wine moms. I think that will be a demonstration of just extreme incompetency, not knowing your lane. Whereas if Trump goes radical and brings in, I think a Trump Robert Kennedy ticket would be very fascinating in terms of kind of taking the two icons of rebellion that are in the political process right now. That creates a very interesting dynamic. And so it'll be interesting to see how the Trump campaign structures itself when it's beyond, punching down at Republican challengers, and is instead trying to identify how do you expand Trump's appeal to its max base in order to overcome the fortification of elections that we know are coming. And that, I think, is going to be very telling in terms of how prepared is Trump to really ride this wave that he, gave great lip service to in 2016.
And you think about, like, what's at stake with the DC regime's gambit with Ukraine. And if that is really the existential bet that they seem to make it out to be, they will move heaven and earth to make sure Trump, on that issue alone, will not ever step foot in the seat of power again. But just imagine, for some extraordinary miracle, Trump was able to be in the White House in 2024. They have, the intelligence agencies, the media, the entire apparatus of power. They have primed their poor base to be so freaked out. I mean, you thought they were freaked out the first time he won. You imagine a serially indicted, if not convicted, Trump somehow by some fluke able to be in the White House again. Like, how, the Republicans have this fantasy that they'll be defeated and they'll just say, we finally defeated. All right, you're the president. There's no way. There's no way. The media would not treat it like it's a regime, an administration. They would make it like it's some kind of criminal fascist takeover, and they would prime their audience to just literally lose themselves. I think you would see Antifa riots times 10 what we saw in Summer of Love. I think you would see just the mass hysteria, it would be so ugly, it would break down the country even further. But at the same time, if Biden or Gavin Newsom is able to win, and then you got another 4 or 8 years of this hellscape of nihilism on children and all the stuff they're doing, I don't see how the country can survive either option here, really. It's pretty, because of how insanely violent the rhetoric of the media has become, and just gassing people up like this. They need catharsis, and they don't obviously want to follow the Christian way to do that. Nobody does. And so the worldly way is to do some kind of scapegoating violence.
The intractability, again, of these political divides. And the beauty of it is that, if there had been some sort of great reset within the Republican Party, and I think if we were to consider, what would that look like, right? What would a return to norms look like in American politics? It would be the rise of a anti-Trump candidate within the Republican primary, even if they did not win. If you had 30, 35, 40% of the Republican vote split towards an anti-Trump candidate, that would demonstrate that Trump's control over the Republican base had greatly been eroded away, perhaps out of exhaustion or out of a desire to return to norms. And that's not what we're seeing at all. The two best performing non-Trump candidates are running their own style of Trump campaigns. Vivek Ramaswamy is, at times it seems rewriting his own history. That's fine. It's politics. I'm not going to fault him too much for that. Opportunism is the name of the game. But this is a guy who, was writing very eloquently about the horrific nature of January 6th, in the week after that happened, who is now, going to the cages saying, oh, well, this is outrageous. Trump did nothing wrong, yada, yada, yada. Vivek, realizes that in order for any of his broader ideas to have traction, he must out Trump rhetorically, or at least give Trump a fresh, new coat of paint. That America first, a new coat of paint. Ron DeSantis, who lacks the charisma of Donald Trump or Vivek, he's not a naturally charismatic politician. His argument is that basically I can do what Trump couldn't do. Right. If you want, I'm not interested in draining the swamp. I'm interested in breaking the swamp. Look at what I've done in Florida. I've reset the game. I've delivered major, bold policy wins. And so if you want a competent Trump, go with me. And this is why he's been attacked as such. And I think with the more intellectual side of the left, they have kind of let it slip, a few times now that, in terms of governing, they would be more afraid of a DeSantis administration than a Trump administration, given Trump's actual record in Congress or as president. I think that is not an irrational viewpoint from their perspective. Neither of them, however, are promising a return to political norms. Neither of them are running on resetting the Republican Party to the glory days of the Bush-Romney years. The candidates that are, Mike Pence has been dead in the water. Nikki Haley has not moved the needle. She's unlikely to win South Carolina, her own state. Tim Scott, who has been kind of has attempted to sort of thread that needle of being unoffensive, but not of being unoffensive to both Trump supporters and old school Republicans. He is not catching on, in spite of I think that there's a lot of assets that he has in terms of just a desire that every Republican voter has of not being seen as racist, right? Given the he's got a very optimistic, idealistic sort of narrative that I think is honestly a bit silly. But I can understand, I could see why that would appeal to certain people. He's not catching on, in spite of being very well funded. And so what we see is that there is no desire from Republicans for a great reset, if you will, within terms of the political process. They are
How about Chris
galvanizing.
Christie? He could win.
No. I mean, in Chris Christie's role, and I think he's very self-aware of that, is just to be the New Jersey brawler to go after the New York brawler. And I think that he is, he's willing to do things that DeSantis isn't willing to do in terms of calling out some of, let's call it the ickiness that kind of follows around Trump and some of the some of that thing there. But ultimately, outside of that specific role, he might have a respectable showing in New Hampshire. I could see him outperforming his 2020 or 2016 numbers in New Hampshire, serving that role with a more or less a weaker field more broadly. But there's no national demand for a Chris Christie ticket or a candidate that with that message. And so again, if we're looking for promising signs, while it is very easy and fair to criticize Trump's record as being that disruptor, the desire for that disruptor, the desire for what Trump represents in the minds of both the base and the DC that fears him or is repulsed by him or deranged by him, that is what Republican voters want. And I think you can even see that with the energy that Robert Kennedy's campaign has. Again, for that nonpartisan voter, for that independent voter, they also see Robert Kennedy's campaign as filling that same sort of populist, anti-establishment, screw over all the big institutions that are screwing us over sort of mentality. And so again, those are the two pockets of energy. And I think
Kennedy
that
sounds
is very
like
promising for someone.
I mean, Kennedy sounds like an outright libertarian on the way he talks, I mean, and I know he gets into it, but I mean, his rhetoric, he's definitely more libertarian than Bill Weld and Gary Johnson. I don't know.
Well, I mean, so some people argue, based off, and this is the problem though. It's the libertarian tone versus libertarian policy. And I think you're right that in terms of tone, Kennedy has what you might call a folk libertarianism to him. It's just, the policies that we have are not just, not optimal. They are evil. The institutions working with each other, the incentive mechanisms, the way that big pharma is enriched by big regulation, that is enriched by, big bureaucracy that captures big science, that whole dynamic, very Rothbardian kind of in its critique of the powers that be. I think that is very much has that sort of folk libertarian sort of ethos to it. And I'm also not surprised that you see libertarian institutions, like Reason, like Cato, freak out about someone like him. And again, there's valid reasons to be offended, from a anti-authoritarian perspective on his views on the environment, on past statements he's had about, the way that heterodox views on climate change should be discussed, on his views on guns and like, there's plenty to critique from a policy standpoint, from an energy perspective, from a tone perspective. He very much is an enemy of the state, just in the same way that Trump is, from a perspective that I think really matters, which is, in the hearts of people.
A lot of people have made that comparison that Trump is basically a Kennedy Democrat from JFK's mold. I mean, excuse me, a Kennedy, like he's basically, yeah, what a Kennedy Democrat would have believed in the days of JFK. And so it would come full circle if he were to tap RFK to be his running mate, right?
Yeah, and I think some of that analysis is, I think it's a little, it's a little superficial. I think it's very emotional. I think that there, there is, I think, this nostalgia aspect for an America that has a government that doesn't hate our guts, and I think that's what people see right now. And I think that JFK, and particularly because the automatic sort of deification you get when you're assassinated in office, and then you add in the levels of conspiracy and the widespread, and I don't think an accurate belief that there were major powers that be, whether the CIA, whatever, LBJ, whatever narrative you want to go there, this underlying sort of a folk narrative that Kennedy was killed because he was willing to take unpopular, important stands. Again, I think that's a bit of a whitewashing of who JFK really was, but that the facts don't matter. Right? It's the emotions, is what people believe that matters more than the facts of the day. And I think that story, that narrative, is very powerful. And I think very much, and I think it's fascinating, when we think back about the big, online zeitgeist of the Trump years, we can think about QAnon and the fact that a major part of the QAnon myth was that JFK Jr. was going to reveal himself as being alive this entire time, and he was going to end up being, Trump's vice president in 2020, and that JFK Jr. might have actually been Q the entire time, and all these, all these, we can call them absurd. I think they come from this deeply held desire for hope, for the belief that there is a good guy looking out for us. My wife and I are watching X-Files right now, and I think that desire to believe that there is a Scully and a Mulder out there really willing to pursue the truth, and no matter what it takes, and go up against it, against higher authorities and within the government. And there are good people within the government really trying to do incredible things and solve unsolvable evils and tell unspeakable truths. I think that desire, which again, I think it's hopefully optimistic. I think it's a naive, but that it's, I don't think that's a bad desire. I think ultimately that goes to what a functioning society needs to have. They need to have that myth. And so the idea, the possibility of going full circle, where you have the mythical JFK Jr. being replaced by the very real RFK Jr. as a Trump alliance. I mean, to me, if we go to Elon Musk's theory of the world, that the most amusing outcome is the most likely, then I very much am not ruling out a Trump Kennedy unity ticket. And I think ultimately, if we're thinking about how does Trump expand his appeal as this anti-establishment figure to the broadest amount possible, I think you need the ability to tap into that small Kennedy Democrat crowd. You need to tap into that Joe Rogan independent fan, and I think that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, that would make the difference in all of those swing states if you could animate younger, independent voters who are apathetic to get out because of how, electric the anti-establishment vibe of the ticket is. I mean, if you put RFK as your VP, you're basically saying, we're not putting any establishment. Usually whenever there's someone who is slightly closer to populism, they always put a little establishment VP pick, just a little checkmate there, like with Reagan and Trump with Pence and all this. But to put RFK is like saying, burn down with the hatches or whatever. We're going full speed ahead. That's kind of that's a fly off the.
and I think it goes to
cinema. It's like,
and I think it goes into, again, what this would reflect, I think, is a change of thought process from Trump, because for all of his populist bravado and for all of his his rhetoric and the way he would insult whether it's fellow Republicans, call out the game of corruption that is the way Washington operates, right? He has the great line about I know how to solve all the tax loopholes you don't like because I've used them in the past, right? He had this bravado of a guy that, the system is corrupt. I've taken advantage of the corrupt system, so I'm the one that can solve it. Mm-hmm. He came into the office with the original strategy of being that sort of deal maker. And I think there's an entire alternative narrative here, right? Where Trump
Yeah, he wanted to run
who
as just kind of like a moderate
a
kind of
moderate.
guy, didn't he? Yeah.
And I think that I think Trump would have loved nothing more than to have been that moderate deal maker. I think that he would have loved of creating big bipartisan agreements and having, you know, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer behind him smiling as he signs legislation that, you know, really offends and outrages the Tea Party base, but makes, you know, the Mitch McConnells and the Kevin McCarthy's happy. I think he'd been perfectly happy. Like, I think that is what
He
he
would have
wanted to
governed like
do.
Romney basically in a lot of things, wouldn't he?
And perhaps, yeah, even more effectively in some ways, because he would have given up, I think, some benchmarks, and I think he would have had more support from people that would never have trusted Romney from, you know, the you know, I'm going to use the right broadly in this term, but that sort of folksy,
Yeah.
you know, anti-government sort of individual. I think
So
Trump
his
had that
personal
possibility
worldview
within him.
versus his marketing instincts really clashed there, didn't they? Because his marketing instincts said go hard on the populist rhetoric, and he kind of got wedded to that because he realized the whole city hated him permanently, right? by
Right.
associating himself.
Yeah. And again, I think this is a good thing. I think a deal making
Yeah.
Trump would have been the worst of all worlds. And so it is, in some parts, the vulgarity of Trump helped prevent the worst outcome that
Because
we
he
could
was
have had
able
from
to take
2016.
because he was able to take what was being constructed as the new untouchables class, and he used their cultural affinity to his vulgarity or whatever to kind of, you know, to bring them into the table in a way that disrupted the hierarchy of American society, which is that this was the new untouchable class, and you're not supposed to bring them back up. And if you bring them back up vicariously by you having power, you ruin the whole order of things. You know, that's what this is about, right? And
And then that's why the left, you know, in the response from the left, it was not to deal make and to give, you know, to recognize that
yeah.
untouchable class that you mentioned, but it was to elevate their own untouchable class. It was to unleash the
I mean, he is.
Antifa.
I
It
mean,
was
Trump.
to,
It's so funny. These guys, they hallucinate and think this guy's the most scheming, evil dictator, but he's the most gullible person in some ways I've ever considered, unless there's just something that we're not aware of or whatever. But I remember the day after he won in 2016, you know, there, or I don't know, it was a few days later, maybe in Trump Tower, they're like, what are you going to do about Clinton? He's like, oh, we're going to reach out to her. We're going to hug her. We're not going to do anything about putting her in prison. Everybody's good. And I'm thinking to myself, man, are you a fool? Because that woman is already planning your demise, man. She's going to destroy you. Are you stupid, or are you just trying to be magnanimous in a theatrical way? Or because he certainly played out, he didn't do anything like they're doing to him. He
well,
didn't
and
do
I
anything
think it
to
goes
him.
back to your point earlier about KFOB and
Yeah.
about, you know, I think Trump kind of viewed politics from that sort of wrestling lens. And I think for the most part, that wrestling lens is a far more accurate depiction of how politics really works in DC than anything else out there. I remember my friend Dan Sanchez, he had a very good article going into the 2016 election that basically was along the lines of, you know, it doesn't matter who wins. You know, ultimately there's no real difference between Trump and Hillary. And he was kind of, you know, capitalizing upon that wrestling comparison there, that, you know, all this theatrics, all of the rhetoric, these are all attack lines that people use in front of the media, and then they get behind closed doors and they share a beverage or two, in Trump's case Diet Coke, and they do the real deals of policy while people are successfully mad on the margins. And the difference is that they took Trump seriously. And I think now, like, you know, the wrestling
So you're
narrative
saying you're
is
saying that you're saying that the Clinton types took Trump's persona seriously, that he really was going to burn it down, and
yep.
so all they needed to do was sit down with him ahead of time, be like, no, 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 I'm going to be just like you guys. Don't worry about it. But they did. It was just a miscommunication. All this,
Right. And so what
just
we have is,
miscommunication.
so politics is no longer wrestling. I mean, politics is more like UFC.
Yeah.
And that is a major change. It's a very important change.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very positive change. I mean, we
But it's
want,
but let's be clear. It's UFC as it relates to people who are true challengers of the uniparty system.
right,
For those who are still in the uniparty system, the Tim Scotts don't have to worry about being criminally indicted.
right,
He's good to go. He can do whatever he's done in his past, and he's taken care of because he's part of the grid of whatever the heck they do to keep them all in line. But you know, people like that don't have to worry about burn it down UFC fighting. They're
right,
still on pro wrestling level with the Democrats, right?
right. Yeah, it's a difference between a basketball player that aspires to play for the Washington Generals
Yeah.
and a basketball player that's, you know, is trying to grind itself out and actually play a competitive ball. And
Yeah.
again, I think within the Republican Party, this conflict is already very much in play there. And I will say, I without trying to give too much credit, I do think that you see a little bit more of a backbone to some of this on the margins. I think Kevin McCarthy has been better than Paul Ryan was. Now, it's always easy to do that from a position of opposition. Obviously, there's plenty of, I'm not here to talk about how great Kevin McCarthy is, but I think even certain politicians like that are more aware of the extent to which the classic days where John Boehner and Obama could say what they need to do in front of their base and then go and share a cigarette together and knock out, a budget deal. Which, ironically enough, you could argue that the Obama-Boehner sequestration deal is the best budget deal we've had in a while, neither here nor there. Sometimes life works like that. But those days, which is not that long ago, those days are done. And
Are they really though? I mean, doesn't the Republicans, the Pelosi's, the Schumers look at a Kevin McCarthy like you're one of us. I know your situation where you're having to placate these crazies, so you're weak. They view him as he's a weakened one of them because they view him as, oh, you're captured by a crazy base, so you're going to have to play a game that's not really your strongest hand, and therefore you're still one of us, but you have to play this character, and we know. Don't you think they're on that?
I think that the areas for that have reduced, right? When it comes to Ukraine, Kevin McCarthy is still, a Washington general. I think on some of these other things, he is. I think in others, the game is more real. Again, I'm not here trying to talk about how Kevin McCarthy is going to save the Republic or anything. He is still a very weak man. And ultimately, I think Kevin McCarthy's great restraint is less his desire to do deals with Democrats and more his relationships with corporate America, which you can kind of argue is a de facto extension of the Democrat Party at this point. But I think McCarthy's restraint is more for the corporate donor class, which I think there's some interesting changes there. I think that even some of the corporate donors are a lot more radical. You look at the extent to which deep pocket Republican donors were giving money to like the January 6th rally. Now they might be upset with the way that money was spent in terms of some grifting side of things, but hey, that's modern politics. But the Publix family, for example, I think takes this stuff a whole lot more seriously than the Koch brothers were. Regrettably, because I'm sure the Koch brothers intellectually are better. They've read a lot more Rothbard than the Publix family, but I think the Publix family has a better sense of what time it is, to put it that way. And so I think McCarthy's capturedness is still with how can I get Google execs to write checks to the Republican Party rather than the other way. And I think you've seen this a little bit with the extent to which serious members of the Republican Party have been elevated to a certain sense. Now, some of this had to deal with some of the realities of the Republican base and so the concessions that were forced to be given in order for McCarthy to get his beloved speakership right. And so that was a hardball negotiation within the party that provide some valid things. But someone like a Chip Roy, someone like a Thomas Massie, who were on both sides of that negotiation, when it came down to who was going to be Speaker of the House, neither of them have been sort of exiled the same way that Ron Paul was. And Ron Paul was actually generally pretty well liked and respected by his colleagues, but he was never going to get a major position of an elevated position within the legislature without a fight. Whereas Massie and Roy have been able to have some of these says.
Yeah, Massie has certainly been brought to the table, and he's gotten a lot of flack for that because of his choices recently.
Well, and that's kind of the interesting dynamic there is, where do you play this game? Do you take the position that any willingness to be a team player is a sign of giving up, of being co-opted, or do you try to leverage your capital to the best extent possible to get certain to get more influence on certain levels? And I have no problem at all with Massey's general strategy. I'm not going to say I agree with every single position he has had in the last couple of years. I think there's areas for disagreement on some of those, but I think the fact that someone like a Massey can look at the current perspective from the inside and see opportunities for his own advancement of his own policy agenda reflects my view that the scope of genuine adversarial politics has broadened, not as much as we'd like. Again, foreign policy is still a nightmare. A lot of stuff is still a nightmare. But I think it shows that the area for real adversarial politics has increased. And again, I think on the margin we should appreciate that. And the question is, how do we continue to grow that pie in the future? And again, and what does that look like? And again, this is one of the concerning things about Trump is, given what we've seen in the past from political blowback, right? And so the weakening of the Republican Party at the federal level. Again, not that the Republican Party itself is great, but the weakening that we saw, that there was a voter backlash to Trump's style in the past. Is that indicative of what will happen in the future should, miracle of all miracles, Donald Trump win in 2024? I don't know. Again, that goes. I think there's a number of different dynamics in terms of what I think it would be a mistake to assume that past performance is going to demonstrate future results. But I think that's a secondary question. There is once Trump is that dog, if he is able to catch that car again, has he learned any lessons there? And again, I think that kind of goes into the dynamic of, has Trump changed from being Trump deal maker to Trump revenge tour? And again, I tend to think that the revenge tour narrative is very real. Now, whether or not, logistically that is viable for a campaign, particularly when you're bleeding with legal fees and the like, that's a different question. But I think Trump is a lot more angry now than he was in 2016. And so maybe that will be reflected within how he actually handles the leadership responsibilities of a major political party.
I think he should satirize what they're doing. I think he should run commercials where he's in an orange jumpsuit and say, "Hi, I'm Donald Trump." And you might be wondering, why am I in this situation? Well, let me tell you, your country is corrupt. I think he should lean into it and own it and just embrace it, and just that's how he kills their attacks in the past. He doubles down and leans into it.
I think you're going to see some leaning into that. I don't think we're going to see Trump without his power tie in a commercial. But I do think that's going to be largely, but I think that's largely going to be the theme of the campaign. And again, the question is America ready for that very explicit sort of message beyond, I'm going to come in, I'm going to hire the best people, we're going to make Mexico play for the wall. We're going to win. I don't think, I think it's much harder to sell I'm more competent than the politicians narrative, given the 4 years under Trump. Now, there's a secondary dynamic there where, the economic performance, if we assume that inflation is going to continue to be higher than 2% going to the elections, which I think is very possible. If we, right now we're seeing gas prices increase again, a variety of reasons baking into that. I think that's, so if there is that secondary dynamic where, the most powerful force in the world right now is nostalgia. I do think that you're going to have some people that still operate purely off of, kitchen table sort of issues, the underlying question of, are you better now than you were 4 years ago? Maybe 5, because like COVID's kind of you have to kind of throw that out for its own reason. But I think there's gonna be a lot of people that are going to look back at 2019 from the lens of nostalgia. And again, the question is, how many of them didn't vote for Trump in 2020? That's an open conversation. Again, the midterm showed that, an issue like abortion can be more powerful than the gas prices you drive by on the way to the polls. But I think more and more the energy of the campaign, the focus on the campaign is going to be revenge toward 2024. And so the question is going to be how, is there a large enough contingency of Americans to make that vote, not necessarily as a vote in favor of Trump, but as a indictment on the system. And I think the system is hated more than Trump is loved. So.
I do think having Kennedy on the ticket would make it easier for suburbans and stuff to vote for the Trump revenge tour ticket, because they feel like, Kennedy represents the aristocratic, high status thing that they want to be. Everyone who's living in the suburbs who's offended by Trump's rhetoric is someone who would want to be a Kennedy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they would love to be able to go vacation in Martha's Vineyard. Absolutely.
Exactly. So I think that would give them the pass to be able to vote for him a little bit, maybe. Who knows? I don't want to
whether or not Kennedy's marriage would survive a Trump alliance is a different question, but that's for Kennedy to prey on.
Yeah. Get it. Curb his enthusiasm about that, right? Not to go off topic, but you did mention X-Files, so I got to get this in. Why do you think your beloved, and I'm saying you as in the general you, but also you too, Our beloved populist buddies, Anna Paulina Luna and Matt Gaetz, have been sent off chasing aliens lately. What's going on with that? I mean, they're really big on that, and I wonder, are they being co-opted into kind of like a disinfo campaign because it's like they have such currency, these upstart populist young folks like Matt Gaetz and Anna Paulina Luna, that you bring them into the fold early on and you show them stuff that looks credible and you get them all gassed up, and then you've kind of like neutralized that part of that voting population to this new big alien thing they're going to do, because they're saying in that thing that Burkett and Anna Paulina Luna did, David Grush was saying that they had non-human bodies retrieved, and I think Nancy, what's her name, Nancy Mance, what's her name, Nancy
Mace? Nancy Mace. Yeah,
she had time to, I don't know if she made it to the prayer breakfast on time, but she made it to those aliens on time. Yeah. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how.
What did Rothbard say about the alien topic? I'm sorry.
I'll have to check it out. I need to dive through my irrepressible Rothbard for that one. Maybe it's in the Rothbard, the Rothbard A to Z. It'd be at the top of the book. I think part of it, I think there is there is an emotional dynamic where I think for you think about a Gen X individual. I know I'm not trying to disrespect Anna Paulina Luna, who is a fellow millennial. But for a long time, right? The most subversive thing, again, like that X-Files or narrative, the most subversive narrative, and one of the more subversive narratives out there, right, was the government's hiding things on UFOs, and I think that's why the whole UFO boondoggle, and I think there's a lot of very interesting research out there about the extent to which I think ultimately this is about military contractors trying to up their funding and the like. I don't trust I never trust a whistleblower from the government that is not immediately destroyed by the media, and sure. So I do not trust trust David Gorch. But I think there is perhaps a emotional, nostalgic a bit like, oh, we found this great big secret. Whether we'll see how they how they digest this information going forward.
Do you think it's an attempt to get back to the 90s through this topic? Wow.
I think in its own way, like if you think about from the regime's perspective, when you have an anti-establishment sentiment building, you want to leverage that in ways that are not harmful to you, and in this case is something that could be beneficial to you. And so from a certain standpoint, from a 4D chess perspective, this is a brilliant narrative.
Yeah.
Because it ties into, because again, if you think about the sort of person who is likely to see the deep state as a big evil, right? That is, again, go back to X-Files, like that is the sort of Mulder and Scully sort of perspective of government. And so why not have the ultimate throwback to 90s culture? So maybe that is an element there. Maybe there's some of those biases that are perhaps clouding some judgment. Now I'm not going to pretend I don't have nearly as much respect for Nancy Mace as I do Matt Gaetz in terms of intellect. So she might just be happy to get on TV time. That tends to be my opinion of her political career so far. But I am interested because like Matt Gaetz is someone who he's a rare congressman that is at ease talking about MK Ultra as well as taking care of your constituency services needs that you have as a constituent.
Do you think he's just playing to the base and giving them what they want to hear about?
I think Matt Gaetz likes a good show, and you think about that. I mean, Matt was the Congressman Gaetz was the first one to really sort of elevate the COVID narrative in his own way, right? He came into Congress with a gas mask and was making a big deal about like, this is a real threat. And, so Matt's someone who is very self-aware at, what is the clip that's going to maximize eyes and laughs. And so, I think this thing in general is a good product for that, but hopefully those skeptical of the bureaucracy of the deep state will, I think take what I would from everything I've been led to believe so far is the more accurate and cynical view is that this is yet again another deep state plot to distract and
But so
attain
far, it sounds
resources in
like
life.
Gates and Anna Luna are saying these things are something that humans couldn't have made. So it makes you wonder, because when you listen to their speeches, like Matt Gates did, I saw a clip from a recent thing, I think at Turning Point. I mean, he sounded charged up about, man, the existential threat of the republic, not about what we face, right, with the corruption and the debt and everything and all the whole stuff. So if you really believe that, and then you're playing around with aliens, and you're telling people there's something real here, and I know that they have both said different things on a Polina Luna versus Gates, but I don't know. To me, it's like, if you guys really believe that, you better really make sure you have your stuff together and not being played a fool, because your voter base are really of the belief that the republic is hanging by a thread, and they don't have time for distractions and disinfo. So,
well, to be fair, I haven't seen the classified briefings and material. I mean, maybe Mulder really was right this entire time, and X Files is more accurate than I choose to believe. But yeah, the nice thing is that with someone like Gates in particular, he's someone who, as much as you can, a politician, he's someone whose intellect I respect. And so if it eventually becomes very clear that our perspective on this issue is the proper perspective on this issue, I do not think he's afraid of reversing course. But yeah, that is a very interesting sideshow within a very interesting political period.
Well, Tho, appreciate your time as always, and want to tell people to check out your website, Mises.org. Anything else you'd like to share with us? Plug?
Yeah, check out. We do a weekly podcast with Ryan McMakin, Radio Rothbard. If you like A Neighbor's Choice, I think you'll like Radio Rothbard as well. And we've got some great interviews planned.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Thank you, David.